Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Halal Gap. I am your co-host, Sophia Alani, and I am joined, as always, by...
Sikandar Deek, your other co-host, and joining us as well is Asif. Asif, what's going on, man?
Nothing.
Amazing. Well, something is definitely going on because for those who haven't seen, we just announced finally, officially, on all of our social media platforms that our main Mosquers Film Festival event, will be happening on March the 12th, 2022. Get excited, Asif. Just give us a woo. There you go. That's what we're looking for.
All right, so if you guys have enjoyed our episodes of the Halal Gap so far and want to make sure not to miss the next one, please follow us on Apple and Spotify and leave us a review. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe to our channel. We have an incredible guest joining us today. Take it away, Skandar.
She is an actress and writer who founded Muslim American Casting, a casting agency that casts and advocates for Muslims and MENA/SWANA talent in the TV, film, and commercial industries. She and her work have been featured in publications such as Variety, The Washington Post, NBC, and Backstage. Joining us from DC, please welcome Serena Rasoul.
Woo!
Hey, everyone.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. This is a real pleasure and a treat. You were doing some incredibly important work, and we're very happy to have you.
Thank you, Skandar and Sophia. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Like I said, backstage, this is we stop to come through if you are a Muslim creative. So I really value the work that you guys are doing.
Hey,
so
thank you. Thank you for saying that. Thank you. So, like with all of our guests, we like to start right at the beginning. And you're the child of Palestinian refugees, I believe, and grew up in a very rural part of Virginia that you've mentioned in the past wasn't super diverse. So how was it for you guys adjusting to that environment? Or was that even something that you were aware of kind of growing up in Virginia at the time?
Oh, man. How were you not aware? You were painfully aware because, like, my parents both had accents. We came from very, very humble beginnings. My dad ran a gas station, so I helped run the gas station, and it was just very apparent we were something else, right? We were different. I think they expected the Mayberry, and they got us. So it was definitely difficult, and I always felt like I didn't fully belong, and there were just like kind of small things that happened throughout childhood that you pick up on, and I have stories. I mean, if you want to hear those, I can go into those, but I remember an example.
Yeah, we're always down for story time. Let's do it.
Okay, I won't go too deep. But I didn't realize this until much later. And honestly, I've never said this publicly. But it was very painful, like looking back. I was on a baseball. It was called Coach Pitch Team. And the reason I was in this baseball team, it's not something typically like immigrants do, but one of our teachers suggested to my mom that in order for us to like assimilate better, we should join the sports teams. So my mom put us all in, the teacher suggested baseball, right? So we joined the local Coach Pitch team. And so for 2 years, I was the only girl on an all-boys Coach Pitch team.
Wow.
And I was 5 and 6 at the time. And for 2 years, they called me Bubbles. And I could never figure out why they called me Bubbles. And I would ask. I asked my teammates. I asked my coaches. I would ask the parents of the coaches. And no one would ever tell me why they called me Bubbles. And it wasn't until years later I found out the real reason that they called me Bubbles back then. I was short and I was hairy, and I found out that they called me Bubbles after Michael Jackson's pet monkey named
Oh my
Bubbles.
Oh my
goodness.
God, that's so rude.
It was so rude.
That's wild.
It was so rude. It was so rude. And just small little anecdotes. I always
Yeah.
knew that I was like a little different, and we always kind of felt it.
Yeah.
It was always this like subverted kind of racism until of
Right.
course 9/11 happened, and then it became much more overt.
Yeah.
Especially owning a gas station. So yeah.
If it's any consolation at all in the sisterhood of being small and hairy as a child, I was once told by a classmate that my mustache burned with the power of 1,000 suns.
Oh no!
Oh my
I
God.
mean, I feel
This is a whole
you
new
so
type of
hard.
podcast all of a sudden.
Are we just giving people ideas for burns at this
Yeah.
point?
Holy shit. Okay. Hopefully nobody
We're
under the
gonna
age of
change it
10
into
is
like
watching.
grooming tips here soon.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. So like, I mean, okay, so you're dealing with these like very first more kind of covert and then more overt
Mhm.
racism in rural Virginia. Was that something that you also picked up on in entertainment and film and media, like when you were consuming content as a child? Was it something that you were aware of at that stage or at that level as well?
I mean, I think, I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't really, as a child,
Yeah.
you don't really think about it in those contexts, right? You're just consuming because you're just excited to see something moving on the screen. Like you don't care what it is. Um, and it, I guess I did get excited to see Aladdin, or I'll never,
Right.
for some reason, the movie that's ingrained in my head from childhood, and I have no idea why my parents let me watch this, but Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, like the worst, most stereotypical movie ever, but like something about it, I was like, they kind of, I mean, ancillary.
Yeah.
I kind of get it.
Kind of like us. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like the worst
That's
depiction
awesome.
possible, right? Like they're like snakes, they're like eating snakes and taking people's hearts out. I mean, it was like
Yeah.
awful. But I mean, spoiler alert, spoiler alert.
I think we're past that point, like the statute of limitations on spoilers for Indiana Jones at this point.
But something about it, just like seeing someone brown on TV was just exciting
Right.
to see, right? And it wasn't until later, and as a teenager, you're like looking and you're like, what is this? Like, what have I been conditioning myself to think? And, I've had a lot of conversations around this, with a few other folks, and you don't realize like the boxes that even when you become conscious of it, how boxed in your psyche and your cognitive map has become as a result of those depictions, because then you think, build a box around yourself and think, well, then that's all I can be in this space, right? I can only exist within these confines. And so it's really hard to imagine, right? Imagine yourself or imagine someone else playing a hero role. Or, I think there was talk about how Riz Ahmed was in Rogue One, and like just seeing him play in like a Star Wars movie was like shocking for people, because it was hard to imagine that he could be in that role, because we never allowed ourselves to think beyond those confines,
Yeah.
We've kind of built the walls. They've built the walls for us, and then we've internalized them. So
yeah, and that's it's certainly a topic that I want to dive into, and speaking specifically about Riz and his characters more recently. But before we're gonna get there for sure, and before we get there, staying kind of with your journey for a moment, where did that early passion for the creative arts come from for you? Like, was there something, I mean, I know you just mentioned Indiana Jones. Was there something about film and entertainment that really sucked you in at an early age?
Oh man, I loved musicals, and it's not like your Bollywood, Lollywood, like Egyptian musical kind of situation. I loved American musicals. Okay. You put on music and I was like sold. I mean, that could just, I would sail away. And I joined the choir when I was in middle school, and I traveled with the choir. It was just a whole thing for me. I mean, I loved it. But I think, you know, that's what I loved. But where I felt like I had to be, and I'm realizing this now, I'm unpacking a lot of this, is because the only way I could relate to my peers who were so different from me was by making them laugh. So anything I could do to make them laugh was a way to disarm that difference, right? And I've said it before, but I'm realizing maybe that wasn't my responsibility, right? It wasn't my responsibility to disarm them and make them see me in a different light. But I took that on anyways as a very, very young child. And I would make fun of my parents' accents when I would go to school. I would act out these scenarios that occurred at home. And my teachers loved it, and my classmates loved it. And then I would go home and I would act out those scenes from school with like my teacher's very, very Southern accent, and my parents loved it. Right. And so I found myself like going back and forth between these two worlds, playing these different roles, kind of bridging these two different worlds through these roles. And I just knew that like I had something to give there. It wasn't until later that I, learned what to do with that. But it became really a coping mechanism for me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So through like using it as a coping mechanism, was it mostly like when you were in school and everything with your peers, was it mostly that there was cultural differences that you couldn't kind of broach? And then when, you were with your community, the same thing was happening?
Yeah. I mean, there were totally cultural differences. Like, Palestinians have big families. Spoiler alert. And every weekend we would go to a wedding. That's how I spent my weekends. Like it seemed like every weekend we would go to a wedding. We would travel up to Northern Virginia, or we would drive to these random locations throughout the continental United States to some obscure cousin's wedding. And that's how I spent my weekends. And I realized that that's not how most people spent their weekends.
There weren't that many weddings.
Right. Most people spent their weekends, at pool parties and, Girl Scouts and, whatever it was. And I found it hard to relate because I had this really huge family, and my social circle and my identity surrounded my family. Mm-hmm. But when you're in a society where it's not really structured around just your family, right? It's more of an individualistic society. Although there's a sense of community, it's just not the same. Mm-hmm. So I knew very early on that what I was experiencing and what my interests were not the same as everyone else. And I just didn't have anything. I felt like at the time I didn't have anything to add. So I would just kind of either regale them with these like funny accents, or I would just remain quiet. Mm-hmm. And I took that into college, really. And it wasn't until college that I like blossomed, I think, socially, and realized that this was actually, people did want to hear about, these adventures, these wedding events.
Yeah. Like it was more something you could take pride in than just needing to not ever talk about ever.
Right. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
And so when you were in college, you were studying like more non-artsy, let's say, fields, and that's kind of what you went to school for. But we hear a rumor that on the side, you were taking some drama classes and some acting classes and stuff like that you didn't really tell people about, or tell your family about, rather.
Oh, God, no, right? Like, absolutely not. There was an interview done this weekend with Cal Penn on Sunday morning, and he said he told his parents he wanted to become an actor, and that created so much havoc that nothing else mattered. Like no other news he could have brought to them, like, changed them. And that's kind of how it is, right? I think in a lot of our families, in a lot of our communities. So my mom, she came to me before I went to college, and she said, "Listen, no politics, no philosophy, no nothing your dad listens to or studies. We're not doing any of that. You must do science or business. This is it." And then my dad came to me and he's like, "Well, really, I see you maybe potentially one day, I don't know, running for office. I don't just think about it." And so I had these like very kind of conflicting messages, and then that's all, meanwhile, I'm supposed to get these degrees, but, be married by the age of 22 and have kids at like 24, right? Like that's all like the trajectory. But I went to college. I went to the University of Virginia, and I couldn't stay away from the politics just by virtue of being Palestinian. So I did get a degree in foreign affairs. And for my mother, I did get a science degree. I got a degree in cognitive science, and studied neuroscience. So that was, to appease both sides. But on the side,
I did a casual degree in neuroscience. Yeah, just to appease my mom. Just did this degree in neuroscience, no big deal. But anyway, carrying on.
But on the side, I couldn't stay away. I just could not stay away from the arts. So no matter how much I tried to kind of fall into this mold, I still was drawn to the drama department, and I still ended up taking courses there, and did what I could on the side. And I ended up graduating and going to the DC area, and I was like in an improv group. It was called the Penthouse Basements at one point. I went on to get my master's degree, and I also studied at the Theater Arts Lab in DC, and did some stand-up for a little bit that didn't work out. That I like to say I did stand-up for public speaking purposes. That's
I feel like that would be, stand-up is probably a good just like life lesson in general, regardless of whether or not you want to pursue it professionally.
Yeah. Oh, if you want a lesson in humility.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Okay. So as Sophia touched on, I mean, you're taking these classes on the side, and you're not super open about it with your family at the time, or at least that's what Asif researched. But there's a question on the FAQs of Muslim American casting, which says, "My parents don't want me to do this. What should I do?" And so what was your experience like when you finally did kind of open up to your family that, hey, this is something that I am truly passionate about and maybe even want to pursue from a professional standpoint?
I mean, it didn't come until much later. I'll be honest with you. And it's funny. I was terrified to tell my dad. My dad's he's pretty religious. And I sat him down and I said, "I want to show you this video." And the video was of my first stand-up show. And I sat him and my mom down, and I said, he loves the idea of me leading or like being, having something to say.
Yeah.
So he was interested to see, oh, okay, my daughter's speaking. He thought it was like a speaking engagement. So I'm in this like crummy, like basement, like situation, against this like, crazy DC mural. Anyways, I have this mic in my hand, and I'm wearing overalls, and he's perplexed. He's like, what is this? Doing these accents of him and my mom, and I'm going through the stand up really fast because I'm nervous. And I'm trying to like watch his movements. I'm trying to watch his like facial, his face to see if he can like pick up on the jokes. And he's like chuckling like here and there. And he starts to like laugh more and more. And then it gets to the point where I'm making fun of my mom and he like loses it. And he's like, this is amazing. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, all of this time I've been hiding this secret.
It's amazing.
And you love it. So sometimes
that reminds me. Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that reminds me of we had Hamza Huck on like last year or something, and he's a very talented actor here in Canada. And he was saying too, he was like, the anticipation of telling your parents is way worse than actually just like telling them.
I was literally just gonna say that. I feel like we build up these scenarios in our heads and think they're gonna end up like catastrophic. Like you feel like you're gonna be deported, right? Like, and then it's just it's actually kind of anticlimactic.
Were you almost like a little disappointed? Like, hey, this should matter more. Like,
where's my you're dishonoring the family?
Yeah. Acknowledge that I'm breaking the rules right now.
So I think because it came later, they were okay with it. I think had I been like 17, 18, the story would be very different. I probably would have been shipped out somewhere. But I think, this industry, I think our parents, and that's why I put it in the FAQ of the website, our parents, a lot of us Muslims come from immigrant backgrounds. And our parents have endured a lot to get us to where we are. And, they fear for our progress, for our survival. And the arts in general, it's just not a transparent industry, right? There's no clear path to success. There's a very clear path to success when it comes to being a doctor, when it comes to being an engineer, when it comes to being these very established, being in these very established careers. And so the arts is scary. It leads to, kind of chaos to them. And so I feel empathy, and I understand where they're coming from, because it's not an easy industry. And I'm, firsthand going to say, I mean, it's just not. It's very, very difficult. It's mentally very taxing, and it's full of ups and downs. And if you're not steadfast in either your identity or your faith or your belief in succeeding, then it will tear you down in a lot of ways. And, that's just being honest, because I feel like sometimes we might sugarcoat and people want to talk about the end and never talk about the process, but it is very difficult.
So the key is have 3 degrees and then tell your parents and then it goes over fine.
I mean, maybe. I don't recommend that either because of the student loan situation that you will find yourself in. So I don't suggest that, but I do suggest, I tell a lot of young folks that are interested in getting into the space, if you are interested in the arts, but just not sure what you want to do, and you do want to pursue, more stable career, well, there are lots of options. I think what I've observed in our community is there's an information asymmetry where everybody just thinks you can either be a writer or an actor on screen. And that's like the furthest from the truth. I mean, being an actor on screen is just a tiny iota, like it's a tip of the iceberg of the massive industry. And so there's so many different routes that you can take. So if you want to be a lawyer, but you're still interested, you can be an entertainment lawyer. If you love fashion, right? You can be a costume designer. If you want to I mean, there's tons of different careers that you can pursue. Like being an engineer is the other one I always say. Like if you have an engineering background, there's all kinds of different careers you can pursue in Hollywood that involve an engineering degree, from set design to sound engineering to, I mean, there's just to systems engineering. There's so much that you can do with these other skills. And so it's about finding, there's this concept, it's called ikigai. It's kind of finding what you, what you can do, what you're good at, and what you love to do, and kind of finding the middle ground there. So, I really encourage folks to, go ahead and get that degree, as long as it's not too expensive. And you can always pursue the arts on the side. But if you are 100% devoted to the arts, there is a path. But I feel like there's it's hard. It's a narrow path. And a lot of people don't know what that path is. But, I'm happy to go into that.
Yeah. So on that point, when you decided that you were going to start to pursue this more seriously from a creative endeavor standpoint, you were able to land some acting roles fairly early on, if I'm not mistaken, including some background work on House of Cards and Veep, and a commercial for Giant Foods. Was acting something that you ever considered to go like all in on, or was it always going to be something on the side while you looked at other, or while you worked on your kind of your more professional 9 to 5?
The irony in all of this is there was a point where I quit my job and I was gonna do it, full time. I was much younger. And the irony is I was in so much student loan debt from getting that master's degree.
Wow, that is ironic, especially considering the advice you just gave.
Get that job. Well, I think the master's degree is where I went wrong. I think my undergrad degrees were very, very crucial. But my master's degree I just did because, my parents wanted me to continue, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I was like, well, let me just go get another degree and add it to the list. And that the market had crashed. I'm going to age myself here. The market had crashed at the time, and it was very hard to get a job. So I, went back and got my master's. But the irony is I had to go back to work again to pay these student loans down. So, be passionate about what you want to do and be smart, be financially smart. I mean, there's a lot to say about financial literacy within our community as well.
Totally.
People always want to talk about, again, they want to talk about the fun, the exciting part, but there's so much headache that you can save yourself by being financially smart now, and taking a step back and having that conversation with your parents and saying, hey, maybe this master's degree isn't a smart thing right now because it's going to cost me $70,000-$80,000. And how long is that going to take me to pay off? So yeah.
No, that is actually like really, really sound advice, because I think, and just even going back to the FAQ question, right? Like, I think even what you said there, which was more about goal setting and giving yourself sort of a window of time that you can then communicate to your parents that, hey, look, give me a year to try this out and I can continue to do something else on the side. These are all very realistic solutions to a problem that a lot of people have, right? I mean, it's not, it's easy to say, oh, just do it, go pursue your passion. But, living in the reality of a lot of our situations, especially given the sacrifices that so many of our parents made to give, a bit more of a stable upbringing, the last thing that anybody wants to have happen is, for their child to be put in a position where they're struggling. So I appreciate the fact that you give actually like realistic advice and not just dreamer advice, right? Because both are important.
I do not want to be misleading. I don't want to mislead because this is such a difficult industry. I want you to be able to support yourself. And I mean, I would love for you to be able to support yourself and pursue your passion, but there's a practical way to go about it, right? And I'm just, I'm very cautious of those like pursue your dreams at all costs.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, no, pay for your bills first and then pursue your dreams at all costs.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I think a lot of people aren't aware of like the pipeline of like how this industry works. There is a pipeline that if you do really want to throw yourself all in and pursue it, you do study it in undergrad as your major, and then you would presumably go on to receive another degree that's called your MFA, your Master in Fine Arts.
Right.
And there are major schools, drama schools, where you would get, this master's degree, and those serve as pipelines for Hollywood talent representatives. They come to those final showcases. For example, Yale, the School of Drama, I believe. Well, I think they might have recently changed their name, but Yale's School of Drama is one of the bigger ones, where Hollywood talent agents actually come to those showcases, watch the students give their final showcases, and then they would actually sign talent, after watching those showcases and having those meetings. So there is a pipeline. It's not an easy pipeline, right?
Yeah.
It's very difficult to get into Yale.
Oh, for sure.
But there are other dramatic schools where these talent agents visit. And I'm saying this because I'm finding that a lot of people don't know that, right?
Yeah.
They actually don't know that this is how it works. But there is a process to which it's not 100% set in stone, and everybody does things differently. But generally, that's why you'll find a lot of movie stars have been graduates of Yale, right? And the New York, NYU, Tisch, and LA, and there's a bunch of schools in LA. And so, I could go on and on, but yeah, that's generally, I'm not even sure where we started, but.
So I actually thought of a question when you started answering it, and then had a different one by the time we finished answering it. So I will ask both still. Because first, I think you'd kind of talked about the idea that like being financially smart, which I love, because I think that is, as Sikandar mentioned, like very practical advice, because I think a lot of people kind of romanticize this idea of like suffering for your art, or kind of like needing to like struggle to make it, because that's just what life is in the industry. And I think that, correctly, as you said, like that creates then so many barriers to people not even wanting to try. Because I remember even for myself, like I would read things about like actors having gone to acting school and like singers having taken singing lessons, and I'm like, what? Like this whole time I just thought this was like natural God-given talent, and that nobody actually had to like hone a skill. It's just you were lucky enough to be that good naturally, and that's how you got it. So I don't even remember, I was like too old when this realization happened, but I was like, oh my God, like actors go to acting school, like they don't just and like that there is
you
actually
could have been a
way.
lead soprano in like some opera right now. She only knew.
Right? My life could have been so different. But yeah, so like
been one of Tony's boys, you know what I'm saying? Not just one of the women that's sitting cute in the corner. She would have been running things, okay?
Up front. But like, so with that romanticizing of it, and then the barrier that creates, like how I wonder how you think representation in the media and in the arts can kind of help to circumvent that. Because if you like, it's so interesting being on this podcast and interviewing people, because they're like, I went to school for something completely different, and I worked in that industry for like this amount of years, and like how this was still something that, as you said, they couldn't walk away from it, so it kept pulling at them through school and through like their life. But like how do you think that representation can kind of help to make that less of a barrier?
So, as I said, there's a huge information asymmetry in our community. And the reason for that, there's a reason for that. Because our communities have kind of stayed at arm's length from the industry. And there's also reasons for why we've stayed at arm's length. So it's the general fear, the lack of transparency in making a career in that industry, and then there's also just the villainization that has occurred of our communities in that industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why would you want to go into an industry that perpetually, portrays you as something so negative and has such a negative view towards your lifestyle or who you are?
Mm-hmm.
So our community in general lacks the institutional knowledge to grow and succeed in these spaces. So there's institutional knowledge, and then there's the network within these spaces that doesn't exist. And that brings me to why I founded Muslim Casting. It's between 73 and 78% of the casting directors in the United States are white Americans, right? So when you have 73 to 78% of the casting directors only representing one demographic, it makes sense that they're only going to pull from most likely the demographic they know, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be able to tap into these networks, our communities. They're not going to be able to understand our communities. They're not going to understand the nuances of, needing an Arab actor versus a South Asian actor. And hence you get, you get a South Asian playing a Palestinian on the show Community, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're just not going to get that level of nuance. And that's in part because we don't have the representation within these other sectors of the Hollywood or entertainment space. So that's why I'm really encouraging folks to look outside of being an actor and look at these other spaces where we aren't represented. We don't have that many literary agents. Well, do you guys know what literary agents do? Literary agents are the ones that buy scripts. Well, if we don't have literary agents, they're not going to identify with our scripts. No one's going to, it's very rare that someone's going to read and identify and want to buy our script. So we need literary agents. We need talent agents. There aren't that many talent agents that are from the MENA, SWANA, or Muslim communities. We tend to just generally get lumped in with other groups. You could pass for, Latinx. You could pass for, something Mediterranean. Maybe you're ethnically ambiguous. You just kind of get lumped into these different groups. So, I think it's first educating ourselves on where we're deficient, right? And then building out the pipelines, building out the networks. What I'm doing is just like, there's a huge iceberg and I'm just like chipping away, but there's so much and I need help and I need folks to want to kind of like put a crack in the ice, alongside me.
So
sorry.
So
go ahead.
I was just going to say, can you walk us through exactly what Muslim American Casting does and for who?
Yeah. So, Muslim American Casting was founded January of last year. So we're still new. We're still babies. We're 9-10 months in. And initially when I started this, we were still kind of in the thick of it with the pandemic. And I knew I had to do something. I had to help like creatives that I knew. And I just didn't know how. So I started to see, some small voiceover gigs or some small acting, jobs here and there. And I just started to send them out to different folks that I knew. And then, I just got curious. I'm like, well, is anybody actually doing this for the Muslim creative community? Like, is there anyone in this space? And I started talking to some, some folks in different institutions down here. And the response was no. There is no one specifically focusing on Muslim creatives, right? Middle Eastern Muslim creatives and casting them specifically. And so then I looked up the numbers, like I said, on what, are there any casting directors from our community? Absolutely not. There are none. So I said, I got to do this. Like, even if I don't want to do this, I have to do this, right? It has to be done. What started out as just like a spark of an idea, turned into this like business model, right? And I just kind of ran with it. I established a website. I started building a database of Muslim creatives. So I have a database now of hundreds of Muslim actors, and not just, I have a few other, not just Muslim, but I have a couple other folks in there too, from other communities who've approached me and said that they appreciate the work that we're doing so much because they are typecast, right? And so I had a couple of members from the Sikh community join, because they felt like if we can get Muslim casting right, if we can get Muslims right, then they won't feel the repercussions of how they've been unfairly targeted in a lot of ways and unfairly stereotyped in a lot of ways. Right? So, and we've just been able to kind of amass this big database, and, I didn't anticipate it to be what it has become. But alhamdulillah, like we've been approached by filmmakers, and we've been approached by commercial agents, production companies, that have needed either MENA or Muslim talent. So, I've been able to pull from and cast a feature film, 2 pilot episodes, several short films, and big commercial campaigns, 2 commercial campaigns, one for Neutrogena and one for Maybelline. The Maybelline ad, which I'm like so excited about, and I'm glad I can talk about it, is currently being tested in the American market. It's a commercial, and it will air worldwide in January. But I was able to find the model to be in that commercial with the actress Storm Reed, who plays in the HBO series Euphoria with Zendaya. And it was just, this spark of an idea that I had a year ago, right? Has just kind of taken a life of its own. And what I found is, I think the most rewarding thing is, of course, getting an actor on set and then watching them on screen. But to see that moment when I'm talking to an actor who doesn't understand how the industry works and who finally feels like they've gotten some answers is just I can actually feel them breathe. Like I can feel that sense of relief with them. And that's what brings me joy, is like being able to explain to them, this is kind of how it works. I'm not an expert, but I'm going to try to help you along the way. Join our database and we'll see what we can do. Right.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I think it's so important. And I think that Asif had also, in his research, noted that the database that you've compiled is kind of equally representative of the actual population. So can you talk a little more about the decision to do that and how easy or difficult that was?
Yeah. So the U.S. Muslim population is split into quarters. So 25%, Arab American Muslims, 25% South Asian Muslims, 25% Black Muslims, Black American Muslims, and then 25% is like a mix. It's like new converts, reverts, Latinx, Turkey. Like there's a bunch of different kind of groups that fall into that last 25. Southeast Asian, Indonesian, Malaysian. So I made it a point to kind of dive into as many of these demographics as possible and make sure that we are not, and I say we, when I say we, I mean like the Arab Americans, we tend to monopolize a conversation when it comes to, being Muslim or Islam. And so I wanted to make sure that, our Black brothers and sisters who've been here for 400 years are being represented. I want to make sure that our Southeast Asian Muslims who, are generally kind of overlooked are also being represented. So I did like this crazy deep dive. Like I was contacting like student groups at universities. I was like, I need to make sure if there's anyone who's creative that wants to be involved, that you guys have a space here, that you are being represented as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're compiling that list, does it represent what we talked about previously as well, in that there's a wide array of different professionals that are required to make sort of the entertainment industry work, or are you specifically looking for actors and talent from more of a creative lens?
Yeah. So I guess in the industry, they call it above the line and below the line. Above the line are like your actors, and below the line are more of your production kind of crew. Um, uh, and so, anyone who, I haven't limited it. I just said like anyone who has interest in the space. I'm going to be primarily casting acting gigs. But if opportunities come along, on my Instagram account, I usually post writing opportunities. I post, different production opportunities, whatever comes my way, I'll post it. Because a lot of people are multi-hyphenates in this space. So there'll be an actor, there'll be a writer, there'll be a director, there'll be a producer, they have many, many different hats. I've tried to just let it be known that we're welcoming everyone. But in terms of what casting actually does, it's primarily focused on casting films. So yeah,
that makes sense.
Casting
and you've talked in the past about wanting to create, specific infrastructures for Muslim creatives through like specialized incubators, right? And why is that something that is important in your mind? And why what would your answer be to someone who says, well, why can't Muslims just go to regular film schools and learn that way?
Yeah, they totally can. Yeah, I highly recommend that. If that's the way that they want to go. The reason I brought up incubators is because there's, this information asymmetry that I mentioned before. I want to kind of catch some folks up to speed, but also there's a lot of like social pressure that they're not going to necessarily find the answers to in film school, right? If you're coming from our communities and your family is not accepting of you pursuing this, you're going to feel a lot more pressure to succeed. And sometimes that pressure can actually lead to your failure, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important that there are these spaces, these safe spaces that are created for folks who just feel like it's a lot. There's a lot that they're carrying, and they need to feel like there's someone there who understands, who gets that they're under a lot of pressure, that they may not feel comfortable pursuing Hollywood as it currently stands, and want to know if there's any other pathway or route for them to pursue. For example, if you are a cinematographer and you're not comfortable filming certain scenes of a show, right? Like, you don't have to necessarily be in TV or film. You could do commercials, right? There's many, many different fields that you can pursue. And I think kind of having a sit down conversation with folks to say, don't box yourself in. There is a way. Let's explore together. And then also, I think I brought it up with Asif. The UK is kind of leading the effort in this way, because they're building out this, this infrastructure that's not just limited to, training actors how to act, or writers how to write. They are creating a safe space for Muslims to come to and collaborate with each other and learn from each other, build up their skills. And then once they've built up their skill set, branch out into the world and pursue whatever they want to pursue. But it's just, it's kind of a way to build that social network that doesn't currently exist for us in the space,
Mm-hmm.
and then to build their skill set as well.
And has any kind of feedback that's been received or any kind of research gone into how to change that, like, scarcity mindset and stuff that we mentioned before that kind of creates barriers to people even thinking about this as an option, even if it is something that's like a passion?
I mean, I haven't seen anything from our community specifically, but definitely in other communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've definitely made it a point to build coalitions with other underrepresented groups. So, the Deaf Talent Collective in the UK, I've been in contact with, and then Women of Color Unite, which is a group that I'm part of here, and then I'm part of an AAPI group as well, and we have been everyone has identified that, and people call it different things, but the one that resonates with me the most is our minds have been colonized, is what
Mm-hmm.
said, and it's now our job to decolonize our minds of the idea that we don't belong in these systems,
Mm-hmm.
right? That these systems are for someone else and we can support them, but we cannot be central in them,
Mm-hmm.
to them. And I think we must work to kind of strip away that idea,
Mm-hmm.
see ourselves in these spaces, because I'll tell you what, guys, there's a few databases out there that have lists of executives, studio executives, network executives, and they are very, 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 very limited to one demographic.
Mm-hmm.
and and I think um, we need to envision ourselves in those spaces, right? Like, it's the executives that buy the scripts as well, right? They greenlight the shows.
Mm-hmm.
So let's have folks in those spaces. And um, I'm learning more about the art space as well. We don't have much representation in the arts, in the art spaces and museum spaces, and being in the museum creator space,
Mm-hmm.
curator spaces. And so there's all these different uh,
Gatekeepers.
methods for us,
Yeah.
yeah, to get in there. It's just we haven't allowed ourselves to kind of think along those lines. So it's
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, no, we had a very interesting conversation with Sue Obeidi like a year and a half ago about exactly this, right? She's the MPAC Hollywood Bureau executive director. I don't know what her official title is, but she
Mhm.
runs the show at
Mm-hmm.
MPAC Hollywood Bureau, and it was about exactly that, right? About how, in addition to the creatives, you also need to make sure that we do our work to get the gatekeepers to look more like us, to think more like us, and to be representative of the kind of the diverse Muslim community. And in that light, you've also been doing some work with the Pillars Fund, and with their research around uh, kind of misrepresentation or lack of representation of Muslims in major motion pictures in the U.S. and the U.K. and Australia.
Yeah.
Um, in that, I want to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about sort of that entire world in terms of, if you look at the history of Muslim representation in Hollywood, we're all familiar with the typical tropes, right? And terrorist, or the trauma victim, or, stereotypical good or bad, or, reformed Muslim, or whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
Um, but you rarely see someone kind of with that depth of complexity. In your mind, how do you make the case to the studios that it's in their best interest to have these multidimensional Muslim characters? Because it'll probably take some time before we raise to the ranks of being those gatekeepers and those executives.
Mhm.
So how do we convince those who are in charge right now?
So there have been several studies that have come out that have suggested, the more you cater to these underrepresented groups, the more money you make. And I hate thinking along these terms, like this capitalistic framework of we're commodities, right? Because I don't want to think of us as commodities, but the way
Mm-hmm.
these studios and network executives think is along those lines. They're, what's going to hit their bottom line. And so you'll see a series of studies. There was a UCLA one, I think, that came out last week that said studios are missing out on $130 million when $130 million a year when they don't have representative writers in the writing rooms. And don't quote me on that, but it was along those lines. And then there was another study that came out that specifically spoke to the Black community. And I think it was in the billions, right? It was like tons of money that's being lost because not only are we underrepresented, but we're avid consumers when we are represented. So when we do see ourselves on the screen, we actually consume a lot more. So that hits their bottom line. That always helps. But I think I want to take a step back and go back to, something I mentioned before, or that I was going to touch on before. We have to start thinking beyond inclusion, right? Like, there's this movement to start thinking beyond what it means to exist in these current frameworks, because these frameworks are very capitalistic. These frameworks are very rigid. What does it mean to thrive as a Muslim creative outside of these frameworks? What does it mean to thrive when our minds are not colonized by the idea of inclusion, right? Like, you have to include me, you have to represent me. But who are we outside of that context? Who are we outside of the trauma? Who are we outside of the post 9/11 identity that's been slapped onto us? That's where I want to be, and that's where I want to get. And I know that's a departure from your question, but
no, it's one of the same.
Yeah, so there's this movement called Futurism, and specifically there's this group of guys. It's both women and men that are working on Muslim futurism, and it's really, when you first read up on it, you're kind of like, what is this? Like, I don't understand. But the more I've had these conversations around inclusion and representation, the more I've realized, like, I'm sick of having these conversations because
totally.
I want to know. I want to see a Muslim thriving, not surviving, right? Like a Muslim thriving in their space, in their identity, and who they are, in their art, outside of these contexts, outside of the racism, outside of the colorism, outside of the colonialism. Who are we outside of the trauma? And I want us to really to start thinking outside of these contexts, and that brings me to something else I mentioned backstage. I've been working with this group. It's called Mipsters. I'm sure you guys have heard of them.
Oh yeah, they're friends of the Mosquers.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we are hoping to. We've proposed to have a panel at South by Southwest for 2022. And it's on the subject of Muslim futurism. And it's through their panel picker program. So we will need our community to kind of rally behind us and vote for this panel to come to the top, because that's kind of how this works. But, it's really kind of starting that conversation of who we are and how do we exist outside of these very constricting spaces, because once we do that, once we can envision that, then we can start to build out the institutions for thriving, right? Once we have an idea of what it means to thrive, then it's almost like we're going to work backwards, right? We build out who we want to be and then work backwards and build the institutions from there. And so if that means then we need to build back pipelines through into the Hollywood space, then so be it. But, we really need to just kind of break free. The chains.
I wanted to follow up on that question with, the fact that we're starting to get to a point now where more and more noise is being made, and like you said, we all want to get to a point where we don't have to just have these continual conversations about inclusion, not just get a seat at the table, but also have a real complex ability to have varying roles and representations and multidimensionality and so on and so forth. And on that point, you are starting to see guys like Riz get more and more recognition, more and more, very amazing roles. And it made me think, and Asif and I actually were having this conversation prior as well, about, for example, Riz in the movie Sound of Metal, where he, an Oscar nominated, incredible performance, incredible multidimensional character that he plays, named Ruben. So I guess my question is, when you're looking to cast Muslims and when you're looking to change the narrative around Muslims, how important, or is it important, to not just have these multidimensional characters played by Muslims, but identifiably Muslim characters themselves?
So it's interesting because the study does outline, kind of, I think there was a study and then there's a blueprint document and what it means, in the sense that you don't necessarily have to be identifiably Muslim, right? Like, you can, a woman doesn't necessarily have to be wearing hijab. A man doesn't have to be named Muhammad or Ali or Ahmed. He can be named something else, and then it just comes up as like, it just so happens that he is Muslim in one episode of a whole season, right? Like you just get this kind of like side plot that he is. And I think that's reality, right? Like, for some of us, our religious identity, our community means everything to us. And that's what we, how we identify, in a lot of spaces. But in a lot of spaces, when you're at work, I mean, you're not talking about being Muslim all the time. You're not identifying Muslim all the time, right? Like, you're just like, you need to write your TPS report, right? Like, that's that's what you have to do.
Solid reference. Yeah.
So, and that's reality,
Right.
So I think when it comes to getting to that point, that's where we want to be. As far as what I cast, I've gotten a lot of stuff from Muslim filmmakers. So there are definitely plots and storylines that surround that identity, because I think we're stuck. I think we are stuck as creatives in this. And really it was the 20th anniversary of my 9/11 that really drove that home for me, because a lot of our identity still surrounds that kind of trauma. And I knew, it's time to move beyond that trauma identity. And so, creatives, we need to kind of decolonize and move beyond that, so that we can start telling more dynamic stories that don't have to be so identifiably Muslim, that they can just be, your random Joe Schmo, in any movie or series. So, yeah. Did I answer?
Yeah, no, I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer to this, right? I think I was just curious to know your opinion, especially as it relates to, the landscape that we're all trying to make an impact on. And I guess where I concluded on it was more so the fact that Riz auditioned to play a character that was in someone else's story that they were trying to tell, and his amazing acting abilities allowed him to land that role.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily, Riz's character, right? It's not Riz's story. It's the story of Ruben, a drummer who loses his hearing, right? So from that perspective, I don't think it matters if it's a Muslim or not who's being cast, or who's whatever the hell his faith is in the movie. It's irrelevant to the story. Whereas if a Muslim was telling the story, then, I think it's different. My concern comes more so in situations where people celebrate the fact that they're playing, Aziz playing Tom in a show, or Riz playing Ruben in a show. Like, I don't know if that's necessarily something to celebrate per se, but I can also appreciate that, it doesn't really make a difference one way or the other. I was curious to know your take on it.
I mean, there's an argument for both, right? Like, they're celebrating that they don't have to be confined, right, to what's obvious to the outsiders, that they are South Asian, and that they must be named XYZ in order to play, this role. I think that they're celebrating that they can be named Tom. But I see what you mean in that, that's not the epitome of where we want to be.
Right.
That's not the apex of where we want to be. That's we're on the way, right? We're that, like,
100%. I mean, it goes to one of those things where it's like, you hope that people don't start to think that in order to have complexity, I must play a Tom or an Eric or a Ruben. Like even Hassan, like in Morning Show, he's like Eric, whatever the hell, and drinks and is like, clearly not supposed to be a Muslim character, but we're all celebrating the fact that it's a Muslim playing this character, right? So, I think there's a fine line there between ensuring that we have representation, but also making sure that somewhere along the line we get Muslim characters that are represented as well.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, we're starting to see that in a lot of spaces. We Are Lady Parts was a really
such a good show,
great show. That and I bring up We Are Lady Parts because everybody's talked about Rami, everybody talks about Riz, but I want to talk about Muslim women. I think that there are some really amazing Muslim women out there that need to be celebrated and elevated. And I love this show for the not just the racial breakdown, right? But I loved how they showed kind of this dynamic, dogmatic identity, right? Like, you can have a niqabi, you can have a hijabi, you can have a, like, sometimes hijabi and sometimes not. You can have, like, it may not necessarily be realistic or representative in some ways, but I think the goal of that show was to say, we are not a monolith. We are so different. We are so diverse, ethnically, racially, the way we practice dogmatically, the languages we speak, where we come from ethnically is so different. And I think that's next level for me is saying we are just a crazy diverse group, and you can't pin us down. And it's time to kind of recognize that piece. And I think once we drive home that point, then we can play anybody, right? Then you can be anybody, and you can be a side character that just so happens to be Muslim. Like, there's so many other side characters who just so happen to be other faiths, right? But at the moment, the storytellers in the big spaces tend to come from one group, one demographic, and then our own storytellers are kind of stuck in telling these traumatic stories because they think that that's what's going to sell, or think that that's the only thing that's going to resonate with these buyers, right?
And I guess, like, unfortunately, that's kind of been true, right? Like, we had our episode that was released yesterday that we'd recorded with Arij from Pillars Fund, that where we kind of she talked about how, like, a lot of it is, and a couple of guests actually have said, like, it's a lot of trauma porn. I think I actually said the word trauma porn, but not putting that on them. But, like, just the idea that it's kind of just like these tragic stories of, like, heartbreak and, like, families torn apart and just, like, such deep pain, and, like, that's how you get people to watch the Muslim stories, or, like, any kind of diverse stories sometimes, and, like, how, because that is definitely like I think what people who are writing films think, but unfortunately is also kind of reflected in the
Mm-hmm.
reality of like our recent exposure to a lot of these stories. So
Mm-hmm.
how can we kind of change that? Like how do we make
Yeah.
it so that that's
So, I mean, we have to be cognizant of the fact that we're doing it. And, I mean, there's trauma, like we are traumatized, right?
Mhm.
So we have to unpack that as a group and identify, that we never were able to process that trauma and, creatively express that trauma, right?
Mhm.
So now, a lot of our creatives are doing that. Um,
Mm.
and there's a we have to let that happen, right? we
Yeah.
have to we have to process that trauma, because it's ongoing. We're not living kind of in a post-traumatic world. It's still ongoing. Like you turn on the news today and, pick your poison, right? Like there's
Mhm.
always some very traumatic kind of story from either, the region, or, discrimination that's happening here.
Mhm.
So we're still living in it, but, um, I think when it comes to maybe what Rij was saying, we have to start envisioning. Um, we have to start telling the stories that we want to tell for ourselves, and not for the writer, not for the executive that
Mhm.
might buy this or might be interested in
Mhm.
this, right?
Mhm.
Um, and
That's that's
sorry,
like
go ahead.
such I just want to say that's like such a beautiful thought that like our participation in the arts is like part of a collective healing. Like I think that's like
Mhm.
such a lovely, beautiful thing.
Yeah, I
And
mean
that's I just wanted to point out that I thought that was lovely and beautiful. I
yeah,
have no question.
that is what the arts is, for so many people. It is a place to process their trauma.
Mhm.
Um, but if you haven't been given that space, right? Like we're just now getting into the Hollywood space as of 5 years ago.
Mhm.
We weren't given that space 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Um, of course, people are still kind of living with that trauma and need to, in order to move beyond it, they need to express it.
Mhm.
And so, that's why I encourage, express the trauma, but do it for your sake, not because you think that, Karen is going to buy it, right? Because that's not where we want to be.
Right.
um, and some people say, hey, like we have to go through Karen to get to our Ahmed or Ali or whoever we want up here, right? And there's truth to be said about that, right? There is truth to be said about these kind of, these gatekeepers that exist. But I encourage folks to not just think along those lines. Like, let's start thinking along, establishing our own, production houses. Let's start thinking along there's a new streaming service that's for Muslims called UsHub, that's buying up content from Muslim filmmakers, from Muslim creatives. And it's not the cheesy kind of stuff that you'd think it would be. It's actually really good content that they're buying, and they're buying content from the Middle East. They're buying content from Muslim American filmmakers and Muslim Canadian filmmakers. So they're really trying to kind of create this new space, and what that'll do is potentially, um, be a springboard
Mhm.
for their content to be bought up by other spaces, right? Um, so yeah, there's when we start envisioning our future selves, then we can start thinking about what else we can create outside of these strict, rigid confines, because we're gonna be having these same conversations 10, 15, 20 years from now.
Mhm.
So that's why I'm encouraging folks to process your trauma, but also start envisioning your future. And
Mhm.
maybe something will come of that. Maybe new institutions will come of that.
That's a great way to end, but I don't want to end. That's the problem. So we're gonna keep asking questions.
Truck right on.
Yeah, but no, that is actually a very, very good point. And it's interesting. We're talking a lot about futurism. Sophia and I just saw the Mipsters video a couple of days ago on Muslim futurism. Super wild. I loved it.
Good.
It was great.
So good.
It is. It's very wild and it's very different. But I mean, and it took me a minute, like initially, but I love how diverse it was. I love.
Great.
I mean, they expressed just the diversity within our community, and where I came from, like in Southwest Virginia, bringing it back to the beginning of this conversation, in Southwest Virginia, these folks would only know what a Muslim would look like. It would be, some shade of brown, and speaking like very like guttural, words, right? Like that's what their perception of a Muslim would be. Whereas when you see this video, you see like, wow, what a dynamic representation of who we are.
Yeah. No, they did. You guys, I mean, the team did an amazing job with that for sure. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit, a lot of it. It's still in the world of kind of what we're talking about in terms of representation, but not necessarily specifically about Muslim American casting. You were recently interviewed by NBC about the movie Dune, and how it's been accused of appropriating Muslim and Swana cultures. And I don't know if you saw, but in the screenwriter John Spates released kind of his counter to that in Vulture, saying that
NBC article.
Well, generally about this idea of, but yeah, I mean, it was. I think it might have referenced this NBC article as well, but it was just generally, in response to this idea that Dune is kind of appropriating Muslim and Swana cultures, and basically, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically what he said, and I'm assuming you haven't had a chance to read it yet, but what he said was that when Frank Herbert originally wrote the script, he used Islamic and Arabic influences as a way to almost make the story feel exotic, so that to a level of science fiction. Whereas in their adaptation, they wanted to recognize that Muslims and Arabs are a part of our modern fabric. And in order to have that same level of science fiction and exoticism, they wanted to invent more and borrow less. Okay. What's your thoughts on that?
Okay, here's what I've learned, you guys. Don't come for Dune. Okay.
Because it is a movie that has been widely acclaimed, like including the Muslim community. Yeah.
Oh man, Dune fans, they will come for you and that throat. I mean, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're Muslim or not. I mean, they will come for you. So I've learned this.
Oh my God.
But what I was commenting on in that article, and the title of that article was interesting, but I didn't write it. So what I was specifically commenting on was the casting. She called on me as a casting director to comment on the casting, and I had to be honest. There is no Muslim or MENA actor who has a significant speaking role. I mean, that's just facts. There's no, it's just facts, right? Why is that problematic? That's problematic because it is a story that pulls so much from the Middle East or Swana and Islamic religion, culture, and concepts, right? And there are words that are said in Arabic that aren't even pronounced correctly, right? There are major, the way the whole thing stylistically is pulled and inspired from the Middle East, right? When you get into certain scenes. So if that were any other group, if that were done to any other group, there would be an uproar, right? But for some reason, when it comes to Muslims, when it comes to the MENA region, Swana region, there's this pass that's given to Hollywood, right? Like, you don't have to include MENA or Muslim actors, right?
Yeah. So just on that point, though, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I think it's relevant because that same Vulture article kind of goes into exactly that, and basically what it says is that, you know, there's a risk because if MENA actors were cast as freemen in which is kind of like, you know, for those who haven't seen it, they're kind of like the indigenous community that lives in this world, which is very much reflective of like Arab cultures, right? And what they were saying is that if MENA actors were cast as freemen and terms like jihad, which was in the original script, were used in the film like they were in the book, then there would be a completely different backlash against that same problem we've just spoken quite a lot about, which is that Muslims only get portrayed as, you know, religious freedom fighters and terrorists.
Yeah, no, and I've definitely contemplated both of those ideas. What I was saying in the article is there at least should be or should have been one or two Muslim or MENA actors who were given that space. Now, they don't have to be all the Freemen, right? We don't need to be fully, to take over. So it doesn't need to be, you know, the 1960s battle for oil reinvented, right?
Yeah.
That's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking for a nod, right?
Right.
You took so much, and Herbert himself in the source, if you read the source material, says he was going off into the desert in Oregon to contemplate Islam, to revisit Islam, is what he said. In his words, to revisit Islam. Okay. And his son, and he says it in follow-on interviews, and even in his fan mail, his responses to his fan mail, right? He says that he has pulled from the North African region. He pulled from the Middle East. He pulled from these different Islamic concepts. And then if you go, of course, to the glossaries that come with the books, I mean, it's just like pages and pages and pages.
You can't deny that, for sure.
Technology. So what I'm saying is you don't have to tokenize us and include us as all the freemen, but there should have been a few characters that were given significant roles as a nod to say, like, we recognize how rich this story was. The books were. Forget the movie. We recognize how rich the books were as a result of this culture, of these cultures. And that's where I think they can, it's a missed opportunity for Dune 1, and they can improve in Dune 2 if they just include a few actors to just say, like, we recognize that you aren't all the same, and you aren't these concepts that the West has just like painted, and that you exist in the future. You exist 20,000 years in the future, right? We aren't relics of the past. That's a common trope that Muslims and MENA are in the study that was done through UCLA Annenberg. I think the statistic was like out of 5 out of 6 leads, Muslim leads, were shown in stories of the past. So implying that our identity, our religion, are all relics of the past. We are ancient history. We're following this old archaic religion that has no place in modern day history or in the future. And that's a trope, right? So we can exist 20,000 years into the future, and we do in Dune. So just put in explore casting is what I'm saying. Sorry, I'm very passionate about this.
No, I think that's a very valid point. I think it's a very valid point. And I just think it was a fascinating take because it was fairly recent and it already had a response. So I was curious to know what your thinking was on the screenwriter's response.
Oh man, I have to go look. I have to go look at this. So, yeah, I'm gonna go take a look and see. Because
there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think we there was no one there to really like, I don't know who was on the back end of that, but I think if we make a big enough deal of it now, then maybe they'll consider it. And so that's why I provided comment. Like, I don't want Dune fans to find out where I live. I really don't. But I do want them to consider the possibility of like adding MENA or Muslim actors in Dune, in the second iteration of Dune, because we gave so much to that story in the books.
Totally.
That, I mean, just give us a little nod, because I mean, if it were any other group, just imagine, you know.
Oh yeah, without a doubt, we've been uproar for sure. The last question that I have before we jump into a quick round of rapid fire, if you're down with it, is what can you tell us about Not to Burst Your Bubble?
Oh God, that was so stereotypical. Like, looking back, I was like, what was I thinking? You know, I really hadn't gone too deep into that, other than, I mean, I wrote the script, obviously. But what I was thinking was, because I had been to so many weddings as a child, it was like my life surrounded these weddings, that there was like this underground, like, wedding circuit community that, you know, was running like this kind of like underground crime ring. Right. And so, but it was like in Southwest Virginia. So that's
that's awesome.
What I was
amazing.
So is it like, is it just shelved for now, or what's the deal with it? Is it something you still
Yeah, it's totally shelved for now.
We can't look forward to seeing it on Amazon Prime soon or anything? No. Okay, fair enough. We'll wait for the next one.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So so I think then we'll move into the rapid fire. I know we've already taken quite a bit of time, but are you cool to stick around for another little bit to play? It's just like the first thing that pops into your head.
Okay.
Okay, so first one is your most rewatched movie.
Sound of Music.
Right.
Interesting. Makes sense. Musical buff makes sense.
Sense.
Okay, number 2. What is your most regrettable purchase?
Oh God. What is the most regrettable purchase? I don't know.
First thing that pops in your head. Well, maybe you're just really good at buying things, and
yeah, maybe there are no regrets.
Oh no! So many things. Probably this orange mirror that's standing in.
Wait, okay, you see the frame.
We saw a little orange something.
Horrible orange, yeah.
There you go. I think it looks a nice pop of color.
It looked nice. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, next one is a movie or TV show that traumatized you as a child.
Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Right.
Was that trauma, or was that like inspiration? I feel like that was inspiration.
Because I would actually like put my hand on my little brother's heart, like chest, I'm pulling out your heart, and like then I had it like throbbing in my hand.
Yeah. That was the way to do it. That was the only way. You had to have like the k after, otherwise it just wasn't a good bit. Yeah, totally.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Number 4, a bit of a different path, but we're gonna go with it. What was the first concert or just live performance that you ever attended or that you remember?
Guys, I'm embarrassed to say this though.
Don't be. We all have bad ones.
This is really bad. So the first concert my mom ever let me go to was with my cousin, and she trusted my cousin for some ungodly reason. My cousin took me to the House of Blues in Chicago, and we saw this band called Kill Hannah.
Oh yeah, I know Kill Hannah.
You know Kill Hannah?
Legit. Of course I know Kill Hannah. They're legit.
Do not know Kill Hannah.
That's awesome.
That was the first live anything like I ever saw. I was very young.
Yeah, they were like emo rock in like the late 90s. Like, yeah, 100% Anna Kill Hannah for sure.
Oh God, yeah, that was ages ago.
That's wicked. All right, I'm
Why
glad I
my
asked that.
mom trusted this cousin, but yeah,
that's awesome. That's not a bad one actually. That's that gives you some street cred in my opinion.
Okay.
All right,
amazing. And then
Sophia, bring us home.
Yes. So the last and best question is, what is your favorite way to eat potatoes? So like mashed, scalloped, fries.
No.
Baked. No. Okay. Excellent. Let's do this.
Fried, like, but they have to be like teeny tiny, and my mom makes them like very very small and fried, and then she puts an egg on top.
Oh, the twist.
We call it batato bed in Arabic, but it's like the way she makes it's just next level.
Is it like a fried egg or like scrambled eggs or just like egg yolk?
Egg on top and put the lid
on just like yolk.
Yeah, dude, it's
what? My
Yum.
mind's blown right now.
Oh, I'm gonna have to try that right now.
Batata, what? How do you? What is it again?
It's just batata bid in Arabic, which it literally just translates to potato and egg.
I mean, you know what? Why complicate
Keep it
things?
simple, man.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Amazing. Okay. On that note, I sincerely we so appreciative of you coming and joining us, Serena. I know we took way more time than we told you we would. So thank you so much. Where can people find you and your work, and how can people find more information about Muslim American Casting?
Yeah. So follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Muslim Casting. I have a website as well to. You can go ahead and go to the talent tab, and if you want to be in our database, you can add yourself to our database. So the website is called muslimcasting.com as well. So.
MuslimAmericanCasting.com or Muslim Casting?
Both. Either I figured Muslim American Casting was too long for people, so MuslimAmericanCasting.com or MuslimCasting.com.
And for clarity, are Canadians allowed to be a part of your database?
Yes, you are. And actually, we do have plans to start branching out into Canada and the UK, but that's going to be a 2022 plan, but a 2022 launch. But we still do want to build out our databases, and so you can actually indicate what city, what province, I think in Canada you're from. It's province, right?
Yeah,
or territory. That was great.
And then of course, you can put Canada, and then that way we can separate you out when we do decide to launch.
Amazing. I would strongly recommend everybody to check out the website. There's some incredible resources there. The FAQs is awesome. Very, very well put together website. And make sure you follow them along on Instagram if you are looking for those opportunities, because you guys do a great job of posting everything that comes up. So kudos to you guys. Keep up the amazing work. And we will be sure to share when you guys have the South by Southwest panel voting up, so we will look out for that as well. So Serena, thank you so much again for joining us.
Of course, appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Halal Gap. Stay tuned for more episodes. The Halal Gap is a Mosquers production. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok by searching Mosquers Film Festival. Thank you to our sound and video editor, Arish Jamil, our tile artist, Narmeen Sayed, and our producer, Asif Qureshi. I'm not going to re-record that. Please rate us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments about our podcast, you can email asif@themosquers.com. On behalf of Sikandar and myself, thank you for joining us. We'll catch you next time.